Hello and welcome to Coffee Lovers TV. On the show today, I'm going to be sharing with you everything about the Ikawa at-home coffee roaster. Now this video is going to be probably a pretty lengthy video. This is going to be a full-on review of the roaster, but also I've been using this roaster pretty regularly for a couple of months now. So I'm not just going to show you what it does, but I can share with you my experiences of using it as any regular person would use a roaster like this. So what I'm going to do is actually break this video down into a few categories, and then below the video I'm going to have some places where you can jump around and watch the different sections if you don't want to watch the whole thing. So first off, I'm going to get into the basic functionality of the roaster, how it works, why it's special, all that kind of thing. Then I'm going to show you the app. The control for this roaster is done entirely through an app on your phone. It's actually really impressively streamlined system, but we're going to get into that. So I'm going to show you how the app works and everything. And then I'm going to get into some basics of roasting with this before getting into a more advanced section. What you find with this roaster is that when you get it, you can plug it in and roast with it right away. The roaster comes with coffee, and they have roasting profiles, so you can essentially like plug and play and roast right away. It's really cool, but you also have pretty much full custom control over roasting. So you can get coffee from other places. There are online sources that we can link to. I've got coffee from a local roaster, Green Coffee, that I've been roasting with. So you can get really custom with it and really get into the process of roasting. So before we dive in, I actually did an unboxing of the roaster. So I'm going to do that really quick, switch over to that video, and then come back. So I'm going to unbox it in this video. The roaster actually came with a whole bunch of coffee here, which I'm just going to go ahead and open this up now. Bunch of options: Colombia, Ethiopia, Brazil, another Ethiopia, Burundi, and Guatemala. This is going to be fun. This is going to be really fun to roast. So this is all green coffee. So much to work with. Really quick, before I change the video view, because I want to give you a better view of everything that's going on here. Before I do that, one thing that you will need to do, you're going to need to download the Ikawa at-home app. So this roaster operates with an app, and the idea is that, and I'm just kind of looking at it now, I just downloaded the app. I don't have it connected yet because I haven't opened this up, but it has built in essentially recipes for the coffees in this box. But for example, I'm just kind of looking here. This is a Colombia. It's got some interesting curve stuff going on. We're going to take a look at all that later, but since this is part of the unboxing, you will need to download the Ikawa at-home app. The box, as it arrived to me, was all stacked like this in another shipping box. So I'm going to give you a quick look at the roasted coffee here, or not the roasted coffee, the green coffee here. So I just showed this really quick on the other video, and I'll get into this stuff. I'll get into what's on here in a later video, but you can see there's lots of information about the coffees available, and this, of course, is green coffee. But that's going to be for a later video when I actually get into the roasting. There's 500 grams of each of these, so 500 grams, 6 bags. That's a lot of good stuff to work with. Okay, so that's the Ikawa at-home world selection. So this really kind of cute box here unfolds. At the top is your manual. The whole process, just by scanning through the manual, looks like this is going to be very easy to get going at. I'm actually personally not a I'm not a follow the directions kind of person, but I probably am going to actually go through this because just scanning through here, it appears that the setup and the get start, all these steps look very straightforward and easy to manage. So that's going to, of course, be helpful. Okay, At the top here, gonna take a look at what's in this really quick. So there we go. Okay, here you have some trays, and let's see what this is. Oh, and a sample. Okay, this is interesting. All right, so you got one tray here for kind of managing your coffee. You'll see that in the other videos. Cute little sort of welcome thing. Nice little card here. So I'm not going to show it on the video. There's some special codes on the back. So Ikawa's home roaster is really new. I have no idea if this will be in your box when you get it, but there's some share codes on the back for give discounts to friends and such. So I'm not going to show that on the video. And then this card as well has a special code for discount on the back. Okay, and then a little sample coffee here. I'm guessing this is about 50 grams. Just by glancing through the instruction booklet, it looked like this roaster does about 50 grams at a time. So that was at the top. I'm going to set this aside. Now to the main event. Let's see. Guessing this will just come right out. Let's have a look at, there's the roaster, several pieces, and you can kind of see, this is kind of neat, tells you exactly what they are. So we've got the coffee storage jar. This must be for roasted coffee. Doser. So, okay, this is going to go into the top here, it looks like. I'm just going to take that out. Spare collection jar. So this goes, you can't really see it in this picture here, but at the bottom, I think underneath this end, this is what catches chaff during one part of the roasting process, and then the roasted coffee at the end. So, and this says spare, so it sounds like there's probably another one at the bottom of this box. So we get two, at least two of these. Okay, now it looks like we get to take out the roaster. Oh, this is quite nice. Little cloth bag this is kept in. Let's see if I can. Okay, I'm gonna try to do this first. Okay, there we go. That's better. We've got cord at the bottom. Now let's go ahead and take this out. There's our roaster, and now we have our Ikawa. Okay, so that was some nice elegant packaging. I thought I'd just come back to this point of view before continuing. So just pulled the roaster out of the box, and we've got all the parts here. There's the basket instructions. Very simple, as I think we're going to find. I think they've made a really nice, elegant solution. I haven't used this yet myself. I have seen the professional version of this used at coffee shows, and my understanding is the home version. Very similar, but perhaps more streamlined. The professional version was designed as a way for to easily do sample roasting. I think the idea is to get more straightforward sample roasting for farmers and producers and that kind of thing. But anyway, so got this nice little storage bag here. This is the roaster. Let's get you out of there. This is not light, nice and sturdy. Play around with it. Here's the other collection. Like I said, we have the extra one here. Here's the primary one. Looks like we've got this little gasket. But I think that everything is going to be pretty straightforward to utilize. There's our doser. It's got this little, I'm going to go through this when I do the whole, I'm going to go through this when I do the full video, after I've gone through some roasting and learned about this roaster for a bit. But it's got this interestingly shaped little inside. This is steel, I presume. The outside here is metal. The top is glass. That's glass and cork and a little bit of rubber. This is a really heavy duty machine. This is not a cheap machine. This is like, feels really solidly built. I am quite pleased to see. Let's see here. Make sure not to drop this. So there's the plug. They're on off, and you get one button. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is controlled through an app. So if you're not familiar with roasting, it basically, it's all about the application of heat over time and how that is done. And so when you can control that with a computer, it makes things a lot easier to dive into. So I'm presuming that's how that all is being done in this elegant solution. Okay, so while I talk about the roaster in this video, I'm going to at times overlay videos of the roaster actually roasting. I can't do a video and talk to you at the same time while this thing is roasting because it does create a fair amount of noise, but I can show you that video while I'm talking. So let me take you on a tour of the Ikawa, the basic functionality. And it's actually really straightforward. So when you first get the Ikawa, you unbox it, you plug it in, you turn it on, and you connect with the app. It actually gives you a initial profile to work with. In the box with the Ikawa, you get a small packet, 50 grams of coffee, to do your first roast, and the app loads with that profile initially. So it takes you on a really nice step-by-step. Unfortunately, I can't show you that specifically today because I've already gone through with it, but I can show you other roasts and it works exactly the same. So the basic functionality of the roaster. This is the roaster. The roasting chamber at the top here will roast 50 grams of coffee. The air for the roaster is sucked in the bottom. The only moving parts in this whole roaster are actually just the fan that moves the air. So this isn't like a rotating drum. The coffee is moved around just by the movement of the air, and this entire system is actually constructed with that airflow in mind. So when you first add your coffee, 50 grams into the top, you can actually roast with less, but the less you roast with, the more inconsistent your roasting profiles will be. So I find it best to just stick to that 50 gram mark every single time. So green coffee in the top sits in this container up here. When you start the roast, so you'll actually load the roast profile with the app will send the profile to the roaster. The nice thing about this is that once you hit start, your phone can completely die and the roaster will go through the whole roasting process. You don't need to worry about the app staying connected. What the app will do is show you the roast as it goes along so you can keep track of it. It's also going to prompt you to take an action at the end, but we'll get to that. Okay, so green coffee in the top, profile from the app to the roaster, you hit go and it just does the roast profile. During the roasting process, and we should see on a video on the screen here, the airflow will remove chaff from the coffee and deposit it into one of these glass containers. That is very helpful for keeping the process clean. This is actually, I mean, the roasting itself, the whole process, managing the coffee, all that kind of thing, it gets a little bit messy, but it's really not that much. It's actually a pretty clean, like surprisingly clean roaster. So chaff will get deposited in here. At the end of the roasting process, the system will prompt you to switch out these containers, which is really easy to do. They do get pretty warm, but the cork handholds make this easy to manage. You can even hold the glass containers from here. As you can see, they are double wall glass containers with a lot of air between. The inside, which gets really hot, and the outside. So you can actually hold them like this. They do get hot, but the cork on the sides is nice. So you do this switch. So you do the switch at the end, take out the chaff, put it in an empty container, and then the airflow shoots up and deposits the coffee into the glass container at the end. So you can see all that in the video above. And that is the basic process of roasting with this machine. The profiles are set up entirely through the app and then just run by the roaster. Very impressive machine. So aside from the ease of use, one of the things that I really love about this roaster is I live in an apartment, and it's really hard, usually I would say impossible, to roast coffee in this kind of scenario because of how much smoke a roaster produces. This roaster produces a very minimal amount of smoke. Now I should say the first time ever that I roasted on this, I put it next to my stove with the fan on, and it did set off the smoke alarm. But what I did subsequently, and you'll see this in the videos, is I have the roaster placed directly underneath the vent hood, and I have the vent turned on while this is roasting, and I have no problems doing the roaster. You might think, well, that's going to be obnoxious having the vent going the entire time that you're roasting, but the roaster makes a lot of noise itself. It's a lot of high airflow, so that's just something that I guess you will need to negotiate yourself. I personally don't have a problem with this. And this comes back to the ease of use of the roaster itself. Once you have your profile set and you turn the roaster on, it does everything for you. You can actually walk away. And this is what I'll usually do, is I'll do batches of coffee on the weekends. I'll set aside an hour on a Sunday and just run through a few batches of coffee. And all I need to do is set it up, hit go, and then go do whatever else that I'm gonna do while the coffee is roasting. Really super easy. There was a little bit of concern that I might need to modify the venting, but thus far what I found is that simply putting this right underneath the vent hood with the vent for the stove turned on was plenty to keep the space ventilated. Smoke alarm has never gone off since that first time, so I haven't needed to do any other kind of modifications. Some of the things that you do have to keep in mind while roasting is that the roaster heats up, especially towards the top in this area. It's important to, when you're handling the roaster, to touch the components by the cork just for safety reasons. You can actually touch the outside, but it does get hot. One thing that I thought I might have to do is create some kind of artificial like vent around the thing to funnel the air into the vent hood above the stove. This is where any of the smoke, the hot air from the roast will be expelled, is from this port right here. And if you were to have to create an enclosed space, I would be worried about too much heat in that one area. What we're gonna find out when we get into looking at the app is that the one thing you have the most control over is the temperature, and that is the temperature measured of the air going into the roaster. And what we're dealing with at a light to medium roast is an air temperature of 200 to 250 degrees Celsius. This is very hot air. You don't want to be putting your hand over this while the roaster is going on. And also, if you were to create an enclosed space, again, I would be worried about a lot of heat building up. The other thing to be aware of, and I haven't found this to be too much of an issue for me so far in my roast experience, but the air input for the roaster is at the bottom here. So the air temperature, theoretically, the temperature of the air going in, as well as the humidity and everything, should theoretically have an effect on the roast outcome. I haven't been able to detect that much of a difference, if there is any. But I am always aware of, or try to be aware of, the temperature of the space around which I am doing the roaster. Like if I've been using the stove or the oven, then theoretically the air going in the bottom is going to be hotter. Maybe that doesn't matter. But in any case, I think it's something to be aware of. You shouldn't worry about like how hot this roaster gets. It's designed to handle extreme amounts of heat. And this is a really well-built, like really well-built roaster. This is not light, this is all metal. And the top here is glass and there's cork. Interestingly, in the manual, it has instruction for if you encounter a roaster, like a fire in the roaster, which if you're roasting like super dark, I suppose you might come into that kind of danger. I'm not going past second crack with my roast, so I'm not even really thinking about it. But their instructions for handling that kind of scenario is to unplug the roaster and let the fire go out. That is, the roaster is made so that if it does have a fire in there, it will deal with it and extinguish. That's how well built this machine is. So before we get into the app, one last thing as well, I want to show you a little bit about cleaning, because this is a little tip I didn't realize at first. One thing you'll notice, and I can't really show you on the screen here, but I will have another video going over how this works right above. For the most part, you shouldn't need to do too much cleaning with this roaster. It handles itself really well, expels chaff and dust and that kind of thing, but there will be a little bit of buildup over time. It's just inevitable. So the top here actually comes off. It's actually just held on with magnets, and this whole thing can come off. And you'll see that I do have some dust buildup, and I can just go in with a cloth and wipe it down. And I just try to do that every now and then and keep this nice and clean and well maintained. But that kind of defines the extent of your regular maintenance with the machine. Just take this off and wipe this down every now and then. Of course, making sure that it's not hot when you do that. And then when you do put this back on, make sure it's make sure you line it up appropriately. You can shift this around, but the airflow of this machine is very precisely designed, so you want to make sure that the top fits back on, and you can double check that by making sure this fits in. If that doesn't go in properly, then you don't have this lined up properly. But it's very easy to kind of check around the outside and make sure that that is seated correctly. All right, so now that we've given you an idea of how the roaster works, on a basic level, let's dive into the app. So when you first get your Ikawa, you'll need to go download this app. All of the controls for the roaster are through the app, and we'll get to that, of course. But so you'll need to begin by finding the Ikawa Home app on the App Store, downloading it, and then the first time you open it, you'll need to set up an account. The account is simply a way to have all of your roasting profiles saved. So if you need to change the device that you use for any reason, or reinstall things, that sort of thing, you aren't going to lose your profiles. They are tied to an account with Ikawa. Okay, so we open the app, and the roaster is connected. Now, the first time you open this, it's going to load with the coffee sample that is included inside the roaster box. The roaster does come with a set of coffees for you to start with, and these built-in profiles. The ones in red are the ones that come with the roaster. The ones in black are versions that I've made. But when you first open the app, it will prompt you to load the profile for the coffee sample, the single 50-gram coffee sample that's in the roaster. This is kind of their tutorial setup. I can't demonstrate that here because I've already gone through it, but it's very straightforward. They walk you through everything. And the nice thing about that is you get a feel for using the roaster without having to worry about the coffee. They just take you through it. You end up with some roasted coffee, and then you can go from there. Now, if you're using the coffees that they provide in their set, you're going to have, like I said, pre-made profiles for you to use. Let's just go ahead and jump into the first one here. So this Andino Especial Colombia. It says 50 grams. That's how much coffee you can roast with at a time, up to 50 grams. You can actually fit a little bit more, you can fit a little bit less, but all these profiles are made for 50 grams. That's like the optimal amount to roast with in this machine. I think it's important to stick to that. The machine is designed for a certain level of airflow, and that changes if you add more or less coffee. So 50 grams of coffee. Now, we're in here. This is what a roast profile looks like. And also you're doing this for the first time and you want to roast with this Colombia. The very first thing you need to do is hit this send to roaster at the bottom. So what the app is doing is the app is allowing you to set up these profiles. And then when you're ready to use a profile to roast that particular coffee in this manner, you send that profile to the roaster. And then from that point, you actually don't need the app in order to roast. This is a really nice feature. I'll get to that a little bit later, but the important part is from the beginning here, you've chosen this Colombia from the box. You want to roast with it 50 grams. Very first thing, very important, send to roaster. You can see up here, it says add beans to roast. This Guat Finca Puerta V5 is a special profile that I made. I altered a different profile after going through a number of different roast tests to come to this particular profile. I'll get to that later. Point is, the app here tells you what's currently loaded. So this is a different profile than this. I made this mistake at the beginning. I thought that if I had just had the profile loaded on the screen here, that the roaster was going to understand that. But the important thing is you have to send the profile you want to roast with to the roaster. And we're going to do that right now by tapping send to roaster at the bottom. And you can see it sending the recipe. Recipe's been received. And now I can double check up here, Andino Especial Colombia, 50 grams. That is this profile. So when I go to the roaster now and I hit the button on the roaster, it's going to roast this profile. And here's what this profile means. So the black line at the bottom, this is airflow. I actually don't mess with that at all. The different profiles, and you'll see them, have slightly different airflows. And I, so far, don't really know enough of the effect these airflows have on the final result to make any kind of change. I think the most important thing to pay attention to is this sort of quote-unquote curve. This is a little bit of a strange one to open up with because it's got this weird spikiness. But what this red line is showing you is the temperature of the input air over time. So these are, minutes going through the roast, and this is temperature. So what this is saying to do is, at this point, let's see here. I'm going to hit edit on this just so I can show you the nodes. So it's starting off the bottom here. When you hit roast, the roaster is going to start warming up, and as soon as it's ready, as soon as it hits this mark, it'll get into this cycle. And in this particular profile, it's going to reach 237 degrees Celsius input air by 1 minute and 9 seconds. At that point, it's going to stop inputting heated air so that the air temperature can drop down to 160 degrees by 1 minute 29. And then it's going to go back up to 196 degrees by 1 minute 52. As you can see, this is very straightforward from this perspective. And that is the roast profile. These are the things that you can adjust in a roast profile, is what temperature the input air is at what time. Okay, before we get into adjusting roast or anything like that, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions like, why does it look like this, that sort of thing. Let's take a look at some of the other profiles and also just a bit more of an overview of the app. As we go back to the home screen here, you can see that the profile that's loaded is featured up here. So I can tap on that and go back into that profile. So it tells you up here, it tells you here. Very important to pay attention to that aspect. Like I said, at the beginning, when I started roasting with this, I had a couple roasts where I didn't realize that the profile I was playing around with on here, for example, wasn't what was loaded into the roaster. So just pay attention to that. Okay, here's another example of a roast. Very different from the previous one. This one has more of a gradual curve up to temperature and then ends at, well, let's just take a look. Like I said, I can hit edit and I can tap on that node and see at 6 minutes and 50 seconds, it's ending at 262 degrees. So these temperature, these profiles, these roasting profiles are made by Ikawa as a baseline start for you to roast with these particular coffees. So that was the Finca Puerto Verde, Guatemala. I'm going to go through, like I said, I'm going to go through all of the ones that come with the machine first before I get into custom ones. Here's an Ethiopian coffee. The Honduras. So you can see they have very different ways of bringing their coffee to temperature. A lot of different things you can do with this machine in terms of that. And really the end result is what matters. But getting the roast profile to the place where you like it is both part of the, well, trick, I suppose I can say, and also part of the challenge. Let's take a quick look at some of the other features of the app. So like I said, we see up here at the top, this is the profile that's loaded in the roaster. We can also see that in the directions at the top here. You can also find that in the menu up here. So the top menu option brings you to what is currently loaded in the roaster. Second one, of course, gives you the profiles that we've been looking at. You can organize them by name and by the most recent profiles used. And then you can also go to this section here. So on the coffees that come with the Ikawa, on the back they have the QR codes. So this can be a really good way to find the right profile for the coffee. There are only so many options right now, so it should be pretty clear just by browsing the app. But you can see here, I have the QR code covered at the moment because I just wanted to talk for a second. But you can see on the back of the coffee bag here some information, and you can load the profile. Let's see if it'll cooperate. There we go. And that'll take you right into the appropriate roast profile. I think one of their ideas with this is that in the future they'll have a lot of different options, maybe even for coffees that you don't buy from them. But for now, you can use that to make sure you have the right profile for the right coffee. And you can also hit find out more, and that's going to take you to their website where you can reorder coffees that they have. And then I'm not going to hit the account one because it has some of my information there, but it's very simply, there's not much you can do like with your account. It's literally just a way to tie login information to your roast profiles so that you don't lose those. The information is just some of this kind of thing. And then the settings are basic. The settings just take you to the app settings. I guess we can take a look at that really quick. So pretty basic app setting things here. You can disable some of the things like the swap jars dialog, the sounds, change it to Fahrenheit. I like having it in Celsius. The sounds and the swap jars thing for me is very helpful. You can also force a firmware update in here. If you toggle this on, the next time you open the app, it'll check and update your firmware for you. But I found that the app does that anyways, so I don't think it's necessary to fiddle with these settings. That is the basics of the app functionality. Next, we'll get into what you can do with these profiles. All right, so like I said, when you get the app, you get the base profiles that come with it for the coffees that come with the roaster. From there, you can modify those profiles. So let's take a look at this one, because I've got this one modified pretty extensively at this point. But we'll start with this one. Just for the sake of continuity, I'm going to send this to the roaster. And I want to talk about that again, just 1 second. So remember, when you want to use a profile, so this profile here, send it to the roaster. If I make edits to this profile, I will need to send it to the roaster again. One of the really, really nice things about this, while you need to use the app in order to function with the roaster, you don't actually need the app or your phone once you begin roasting. So it's only necessary for setup. And in fact, I believe this is the case. This is what I've observed, is that let's say I've loaded this roast profile here. Let's say I roast on it now. Then I'm finished roasting for the day. I turn off the roaster, unplug it, put it away, everything. The next time I take it out, it's still going to have this roast profile on it. So the only time you really need to use the app is when you're changing the roast profile in the roaster. And you need to do that, of course, when you change coffees, but also when you want to edit the roast profile. So you will find yourself using the app all the time, but there's some nice redundancy in that once you get yourself set up and roasting, particularly if you're doing multiple batches at a time, like if you set yourself aside a couple hours to roast a whole bunch of coffee, you don't need to constantly have your app out and running in order to do the roast. Once you get it set up, you can just hit go. You'll need to swap the jars when it's time to swap the jars, add new coffee, that sort of thing. But you don't need to worry about your phone being taken up the whole time. I think that's really, really an excellent setup. Okay, so what can you do with these roast profiles? Now, like I showed you before, let's say you start with this base Finca Puerto Verde, Guatemala, and you don't necessarily like the result of the coffee. Maybe it's a little too roasty. You think maybe the air got a little too hot. Maybe it's not as sweet as you want it. I'm going to get more into the advanced roasting aspects of that in the video, in a different part of this video. What I want to do right here is just show you the functionality of the app that lets you address those challenges, those like parts of the roasting process that are why people, I think, really get into roasting, which is modifying your roast, making it the way that you want. So you start with a base roast, and then you go from there. You want to make some adjustments. Well, it's very simple. You open up your roast profile, you hit edit, and now you can change any of these points, and you can also add more. So I can do like weird and freaky things. Now you really don't want to do this because this is not going to end up with a good with a good roast. But just as an example, you can be adding different points. There's probably a limit to the amount of nodes you can add, and you don't really need to add a whole lot either in order to get a good roast. What I did just there, by the way, is pretty straightforward. I just hit cancel at the bottom to return us to what we had. All right, but let's say that we've done this roast and we find it to be maybe not quite as sweet as we want. It's a little bit roasty, so we want to take the temperature down and maybe have it roast a little bit longer. So the very first thing we can do is knock that temp down and add a couple minutes. You'll notice the airflow at the bottom follows along with this. Again, like I said, so far in all of my editing of roast profiles, I've never touched the black bar. That's something you can change, but I've not ever done that sort of thing. Sorry, I had to reset that because I started fiddling with it. But again, it's very straightforward. You can change the roast to look like that. Now let's say you want this and you want to try this. You want to see what happens. Well, now you hit save. Because you're saving off of a base profile, it's going to make you save a new version. Oops. Running out of numbers here. Vid test. So since this is for the video I'm making here. All right, now we have a custom profile. Now notice again, this isn't what's in the roaster. Let's go back here. This is the profile that's in the roaster. If we can go to last used, we can see the last profile we've messed around with. We want this to be in the roaster to roast with, so we got send to roaster. Recipe received. And now it's up here, up in the roaster. And you can find on the main page that that is now the profile that's being used. Now, I've gone through a number of iterations on different roast profiles here. I modified the Finca Puerta a few times at the beginning. Let's see if we can go through some of the modifications that I've done. Okay, I think I started off with this kind of modification. I simply took the profile from the original. Let's look back at the original again. So here's the original. And then what I did is I just extended the roast from that point. I could tell you I didn't like the result from that. But instead of continuing with that, what I actually ended up playing around with a bunch of other different roast profiles. And I also started roasting with a coffee that did not come with you can see I did a bunch here with Brazil. What I ended up doing is I ended up playing around with the green coffee that was not in the box. Like I said, I'm going to get into that more in detail in a different video. Let's take a look at the Brazil here really quick, since this is another example of one that I modified quite a bit. So this was the base Brazil, and then this was an extended roast. I said, I'm not sure about that. I tried this version. Actually, I think I tried this version first, and then I tried this. You can see my kind of V2. I'm still like playing around with the naming conventions. I tried this variation. Just different examples of kind of playing around with roast time, temperature, changing things around. This was the last version I did. I honestly never quite got the Brazil exactly where I wanted it to. For the This Guatemala Los Dos Socios that you're seeing here, this was a grain coffee that I picked up from a local roaster, Conduit Coffee, and you'll see that on the video. And what I did is I took the Finca Puerto Verde and I modified it, and I started working on that with the Los Dos Socios. So you see that was the first version. Pulled the temperature down a bit more. Started pulling the temperature down, extending the roast. And then I started making the curve a bit more gradual. So you notice here that I like the roast time. One of the things I'm going to talk about in the advanced video is the things you're looking for are when the coffee changes color and when it hits first crack, and some indicators of that. But you can see here I started extending out the beginning part so that it was slower coming up to temperature. And then this is what I ended up with for that roast. And it was really quite nice. I actually just went back and did some batches with the original, the Guatemala Finca Puerto Verde. The first batch I did with this very profile. I just took this and I roasted the Puerto Verde with this. Decided it wasn't quite right, and made this version that I roasted today. Looks very similar, but the ending temperature, so this point here was about 5 degrees higher, as were these two, ending at 9:30. Let's take a look at, yes, I do want to leave. So this is the one, so you can see I bumped up the temperatures about 5 degrees, and I really have liked that result. So this is an example. This is what happens when, okay, yeah, don't want to save that. So you saw what happened when you change the base profile. You make an edit, you save, it makes you save a new name. Well, here's what happens when you change a custom profile. Okay. I'm not actually going to go with this, but this is just an example. By the way, I can just delete the recipe down here, and I might go do that with the older ones I don't like. But once you hit save, it asks, do you want to overwrite this or save a new copy? So I'm going to cancel that because I don't want to make the change. For these black icon profiles, the custom ones, you can just overwrite them. You can save new versions. In order for me to track what I've been doing, I like saving the new versions of things, because when I make a change in here, I'm not 100% sure what the result's going to be. I have a theory. I want to see what happens. It might be that I want to backtrack to a previous version. But that should give you an clear understanding of what the app is all about. And again, just to reiterate the basic functionality, you select the profile that you want to use when you open the app. You make sure you send that to the roaster. This sends the roast profile, all this temperature guideline, the airflow, everything to the roaster. And now the roaster is controlled all on its own. If you have the app running, you will be able to track along. You're going to see the time kind of going across at the top here. And you'll see this in some of the other videos as I have the app running alongside the roaster. So it is nice to be able to see that in the app to follow along. But also it's nice that once you get used to roasting, to using the same profile, if you're doing a number of batches, you just don't need your phone. You can just run with the roaster itself. So that is, in essence, the Ikawa at-home roasting app. That is everything that is really involved in there. All right, so now we're coming to the end of this long video demonstrating a whole lot about the Ikawa coffee roaster. And I want to say a few things, because at this point, it's been a few months actually since I even started the video. I've been using the machine regularly and learning a whole lot. And it's been a really interesting experience in terms of filming as well as presenting information, because not only have I been learning and using the product itself so that I can share that information with you, like firsthand what it's like to use it on a regular basis, but also like the processes themselves, because before this, I really only had an intellectual understanding of roasting coffee. And this is the first time really that I've gone in on a regular basis to experience that process myself. So through all this experience with the machine, I've gone through and roasted almost all of their coffee. I still have a little bit left in this bag, and I dove in quite a bit into coffee from other sources, going to a local roaster mostly to get my green coffee, and just playing around with all of those things. With the coffee that came with the machine, of course, I used all the provided profiles and then played around with adjusting those. I showed you that in one of the previous sections where I talk all about the basics of the app and getting in and adjusting profiles. Then went steps further to create my own custom profiles. And I want to tell you a little bit about that whole process. This section, I really want to get into, I guess, what I consider like the advanced techniques for roasting with this machine. Before I get into that, a few things that I have learned. The first is that part of the joy, and I think I understood this pretty much from the beginning, and I've said this in other parts of the video, but part of the joy of like roasting, especially with a machine like this, is the process that you go through on a regular basis. And this is the reason why it's been a much longer process than I thought to put together the video. But every time that I learned something new, I would apply it, and then I would observe, and then I would make changes, and I would learn something new, and I would want to share that, and then apply it, and etc. So every time I went through a roasting process, I would give myself new information and new experiences to learn from and make changes the next time. And just to give you some background on that, I decided to treat this like probably most people who are going to enjoy roasting coffee at home but not be super crazy about it, but I can see roasting on a regular basis like once a week. It does take some time. You got to carve a little bit out of your day, and it can make a lot of noise. So I could see like once a week being a pretty regular roasting schedule for people. So another thing that I have learned about this machine, and like I said, I've been roasting with this machine for almost 6 months now actually. It is incredibly reliable. I've not had a single issue as of yet. I've said this in other parts of the video, but it's very well built. And knowing the level of work and effort they put into their professional line of machines, which is very similar to this one, I can only imagine that my experience is what you will have as well, that you're just going to be able to plug this guy in and start roasting, and roast regularly and often and not really have any issues. The one last thing before I get into the advanced roasting, things you want to observe, and how to really dig in and roast your own coffee, the things that I've learned on that. It's very easy with this machine to roast a good cup of coffee. It's very challenging, and this is not a thing with the machine, but it's just challenging to get it perfect. And I think that's just a process of roasting. I think the wonderful thing here is that I can make a good coffee. I can roast a really good coffee just going right in, using the provided profiles, even making some slight adjustments. I can get something pretty darn good. But then the process of getting that perfection is really fascinating. So how do we do that with this machine? Let's say that you've gone through the provided coffees and now you're starting to get your own green coffee. Maybe you've gotten some coffee from a local roaster. Maybe you ordered some online from a place like Sweet Maria's. How do you take this machine and roast your own coffee and really get into the whole process? So the way I started off, and like I said, I explained some of this in earlier parts of the video, but we start by modifying the existing profiles. So you're going to take a profile that has given you a really good result, and then you're just going to start modifying it. And the way that you do that has to be based off of trackable data. Like, you can't change what you don't measure. So during the roasting process, there are 2 or 3 things that you want to keep track of. The first that I always look for is to make note of when the color of the coffee changes. The second is then when the first crack happens. And the third maybe note is when the second crack happens if you're doing dark roasted coffee. I actually haven't done dark roasted coffee with this machine. You can. I decided not to because I don't really have any interest in it. I may go on to do another video where I get into dark roasting with this machine just to see what it can do with that. But I figure this video is long enough, so I'll leave that for another time. And then, of course, after the roasting process, you can smell the coffee and you can taste the coffee. There's one more point as well, and this is something that I've been using to try to figure out how to make my adjustments, because in the profiles, the only thing that you can really adjust of significance are the temperature points and the time. So one of the reasons for tracking first crack, for example, I like to do a light roast, but I like it more developed because I want that sugar sweetness. I wanted a little bit caramelized, a little bit developed sugar sweetness. I'm not going for a medium roast, but I do want to bring that out. And from the advice that I've been given, you want to roast for like a minute or so after first crack. What I found with the profiles that I've been enjoying is that after like first crack will actually take a while. So I'll hear first crack starting at some point, and then it may go on for like 30 seconds or so. And after that point, when I like it to roast for about a minute. And then from there, how you make those adjustments is going to depend on certain results. So one of the things you can look at, and I'm going to put an image above the screen that will hopefully show this, is the evenness of your coffee in the roast. So I'm just taking a coffee bean here and splitting it apart. And then what I'm looking for is, this one didn't split very well. Let me try another one here. Okay. What I'm looking for is the cross section where I can see the outside layer of the coffee and the inside layer of the coffee. And I'm looking for an even roast. I'm also trying to pay attention to see if there are any like gaps or pockets. But one thing that I did notice when I was having some challenges early on, where I liked certain aspects of the coffee, like the sweetness maybe was good, but it kind of felt under roasted and it was like really confusing. Looking at the coffee in this way, I could tell that the outer layer was roasted darker than the inner layer, which meant that the outer layer was cooking faster than the inner layer. So what I did once I learned this, once I started to observe this, is I made the heat application more gradual. Because I felt like, okay, if that's happening, that means it's getting high heat too fast and it's not giving enough time for the inside of the coffee to cook before the outside cooks. So that's what led me to create a more gradual curve. What I actually ultimately ended up with is the understanding that for me, I can just use one baseline curve for any coffee. This is where I'm at with my understanding of this right now. I had thought for a bit that maybe I want to have a curve by region, or possibly by processing, like maybe the natural and the washed need different curves. And they probably do need different treatments, but I've roasted multiple different regions and washed and natural coffees, all using this base curve that I've come to. And while they all usually end up wanting some slight adjustments, like maybe I want to bump up the end temperature a little higher, or maybe I want to give it a little more heat sooner, they all still end up looking close to this curve. And I have the curve in the app, and of course, like I said, I'll put it on the screen. I'll put that on the screen as well. And what I'm actually going to do, because I think this is a pretty useful approach to start with any coffee roasting with this machine, is below the video, I'm going to link that profile. So if you have the Ikawa, I'd be really curious to hear from you. If you have the Ikawa, check out that profile and try roasting with it. I don't know how tied into specific machines profiles are, like if my profile would behave the same on yours. I know that the atmosphere within which coffee is roasted, like the room that you're in, the humidity, temperature, all that kind of thing can affect the roast. So, of course, there's the coffee itself to get into. But I've found thus far that starting with this base gradual curve really has worked very well. And the curve that I come up with is quite different from the ones that they have provided for their baseline coffees. And that's not to say that those are bad. Like I said, those provide you a great way to get started, to just throw coffee in, turn it on, and get tasty roasted coffee. But what I've found with mine is that I get more developed sweetness, bringing out more of the natural origin of the coffee in an even and coherent way in the cup. And I've been really pleased with that. And one last thing on changing. When you go in and change something, so like I said, sometimes I want to raise the temperature, sometimes I want to roast it a little bit longer, or maybe I think that heat needs to be applied earlier on. And I would look at like the evenness of the roast afterwards, like in terms of application of the heat, to maybe try to figure that out. Whenever I make a change and then test out that change, I only make one change at a time. As soon as you make multiple changes at a time, you just end up having no idea what is causing your result. So you really need to take this approach one step at a time. I find that I can, with this baseline curve that I've established, I can do, maybe I'll do 2 batches initially with the coffee, and then I'll wait a day and I'll brew and taste. and then I'll wait a couple more days and brew and taste again, and then I'll make some notes on maybe what I want to change, and then roast again the next weekend. Even if I like the coffee, I still try to do another round where I try something different. I always like to push things around and see what I can come up with, even if I like the result, just because I feel like you never really know what you might discover, and the only way to figure that out is if you make changes. But again, one change at a time. So getting back to that, one of the reasons I mentioned this is because, so a batch on here is 50 grams. So if I go through 2 to 4 different tests of a coffee, that could be up to 400 grams of that coffee used. These bags contain 500 grams, I think. So that's a bit of a challenge from that perspective, but that changes when you start sourcing your green coffee elsewhere. When you start going online, you can order green coffee by small amounts of pounds, 5 pounds. You can get up to 20 pounds pretty easily of coffees before getting into really huge bags. And maybe you have a really good local roaster that you can take advantage of and work with them. And that kind of brings me to, I guess, my last point in all of this is that this entire process, if you really want to get into it and really want to understand why your coffee is doing what it's doing and what changes you can make to get the result that you're looking for, really, you can really benefit from having the guidance and assistance of other people, especially professionals, but other people who are also home roasting as well. I think having that kind of community, you can really get some good outside input on what you're doing. If you have a local roaster who enjoys engaging on this kind of thing, it can be really fun to sit down and exchange little batches of coffee and just say, hey, do you mind tasting what you think about this? As I started getting more and more into this, I was doing this with Jesse at Conduit Coffee. He would taste the coffee and immediately know exactly what was wrong in the roast. And it was something where I was tasting it going, oh, that tastes pretty good. It's not quite what I want, but I have no idea. And his experience allows him to see certain flavor elements like grassiness or slightly undoneness in a roast that is clear when you've roasted a heck of a lot of coffee and you've been able to recognize those tastes, but when you're getting into it new, is a little hard to tell. I think that Ikawa has the intent of setting up like a community for roasters, and if there is one already, I'll link to it below. Maybe you can get your friends into roasting as well. But then, of course, always my mantra is connect locally. Try to find roasters around you. Even if you're roasting your own coffee, most roasters are really passionate about what they're doing and love to share their experience. So that's been quite the journey for me, roasting with the Ikawa. Still a heck of a lot of fun. And now that I've got my baseline profile established, actually it's become a lot easier to be able to anticipate that I'm going to roast more delicious coffee. Before I found the baseline roast, while I can know that I'm going to roast a coffee that's pretty good, when it isn't quite what you're looking for, it can be disappointing. So before I got to this point, I would have some roasts that were great, and I would have some roasts that were just not, I mean, they were fine, but kind of in that disappointing way. But now that I've got this baseline curve that I use for everything, I found almost like a new excitement in roasting with the machine. So that's a lot of fun. If you have any questions about the Ikawa roaster, please leave your questions below in the comments. I'm going to continue using the roaster myself, but I can also connect with Ikawa and pass along information. People have unique questions. We can get those answered in the comments. If you have any home roasting questions in general, of course, don't hesitate to ask them below. I'm still learning. I want to be completely transparent on that. There are plenty of people in the world who have a lot more roasting experience than I do. But if I don't know the answer to something, I will go find the person who does. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy learning about the craft of coffee, below this video and at the end screen, I'm going to share with you a link where you can go download a free issue of Extracted magazine. Extracted is all about the craft of coffee and the people in it. So if you love learning about these things, you're going to enjoy that. Go sign up and get your free issue. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.